Hey, Mate 40 here. Do you know why I spend, $90 a year for a subscription to the Financial Times so I can read cutting-edge articles like the one I just saw about the new version of ChatGPT? ChatGPT, the latest version, it's cutting edge, it's amazing, it's showing, all sorts of new powers, and it's just going to upend the world as we know it. But, and this is why I spend the big bucks for the Financial Times, it is, you should be sitting down, right? You should be sitting down to be able to handle what I'm about to tell you. But apparently, ChatGPT is, quote, open to abuse. Open to abuse. The news media loves to do articles about things that are open to abuse. Well, guess what? There's absolutely nothing in the world that is not open to abuse. Right? I only had one girlfriend who I yelled at, to the best of my memory. All right? But there was this one girl I was going out with in 2006 into 2007 who I yelled at way too many times, particularly when she was driving down the freeway. I'm not proud of that. I'm embarrassed by that. But there was something about that dynamic of me and her that I would yell at her. And so even 40, like this sterling moral character, Mr. Sensitivity, Mr. Righteousness, your moral leader, right? Even 40 is open to abuse. Water, you can drink too much water. It is open to abuse. God, right? People use God in horrible ways. Belief in God is open to abuse. Orthodox Judaism can be a cover for sexual abuse, for financial abuse, for cultural abuse, for intellectual abuse, for personal abuse. All sorts of forms of abuse can be covered up by organized religion, by secularism, by atheistic communism. There is nothing that's not open to abuse. Is that one of the lamest approaches of journalists that you consistently have to encounter? Modafinil, open to abuse. Crystal Light, classic orange, all right? If I drink more than a cup of it a day, I get hives. It's open to abuse. You can consume too much protein, right? Some people have died from protein overdoses. Being a vegetarian is really unhealthy for some people, such as me, all right? Vegetarianism, way open to abuse. Secularism, religiosity, 12-step programs, cocaine. Like, you can even do too much cocaine. Sex is open to abuse. Like, everything is open to abuse. All right. I just went to the Google News, all right? And I put in open to abuse. Los Angeles Times, top result column, California should reform use of solitary confinement. You know why? Because solitary confinement is open to abuse. Failure to root out abusers in ambulance service leaves vulnerable patients at risk. Did you know that ambulance services are open to abuse? That's from England, The Independent, The Economist. How spying on sewage could save lives. Guys, wastewater surveillance, all right? I've said this time and time again. Wastewater surveillance is a cheap tool to spot health program problems, but it is open to abuse. Advanced AI will make scams harder to spot, all right? Scams, advanced AI, all open to abuse. AI voice simulator easily abused to deepfake celebrities spouting racism and homophobia. Europe divided on gender self-determination. Apparently even gender self-determination is open to abuse. Philippine Congress approved sovereign wealth fund bill, but even this sovereign wealth fund bill is open to abuse. Did you know that there was a gap in the Constitution that led to January 6th, right? The Constitution of the United States, guys, it is open. It is open to abuse. Everything is open to abuse, right? So just saying that something's open to abuse, right? There are situations where you are highly likely to become abusive. There are situations where I am highly likely to become abusive. There are situations where I am highly likely to just passively accept abuse, right? I got my share of abuse when I was very young. And so there's a part of me that considers getting abused is just normal and natural, and it's all I deserve. So unless I'm spiritually fit and in a good place, there's a large part of me in many abusive situations. So I've had very abusive bosses at times, and part of me just thinks, oh, that's what I deserve, right? So there are situations where many of us will simply put up with abuse. There are other situations where we will dish out abuse, all right? So there are some situations where we will be concentration camp guards, and there will be other situations where we'll be concentration camp inmates. It's not written out by the will of heaven that, you know, only Nazis or only Germans can be concentration camp guards and only Jews can be abused and concentration camp inmates, right? Depending on the situation, you may be called to become a concentration camp guard, and in other situations, you may become a concentration camp inmate. Okay, by popular demand, a lot of people said, 40, you play Tucker Carlson, but you don't critique him. Let's critique Tucker Carlson.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight it's been a tough couple of years for the experts when it comes to big public policy questions, complicated.
Really, it's been a tough couple of years for experts, but for everyone else, all right, it's been just dandy. It's just been Susie Sunshine. It's just been the easiest walk in the world, right? Guess what? Experts, by and large, were fairly good on COVID, right? Experts, by and large, have held up their end of the bargain. But guess what? Experts are like you and me, except that they have expertise, so they are deeply flawed. Yeah, SS Oberstubenführer 40. Yes, in certain circumstances, I could become the Jewish Adolf Hitler. In other circumstances, I could become the Jewish Mother Teresa. Right? In other circumstances, I could become, the Jewish Moshe Rabbeinu, like, leading the chosen people out of slavery and into freedom. In other circumstances, I could be whoever was the baddie who turned in Anne Frank. Right? Depends on the circumstance, depends on my state of, spiritual perfection at that time. So I wish I could say, oh, I could never be SS Oberstubenführer 40, but it's not true, right? There's almost nothing that I've ever read about or learned about in the human condition that I would say is completely foreign to me. It's like, oh, don't know how anyone could do that. I mean, I think I heard a story about some dude was in prison and his appendix burst, and so he had to have his appendix removed. And then the other prisoner started raping him through the stitching of where his appendix was removed. So I don't see myself like raping people's, stitching where they had an appendix removed. But aside from that, pretty much, everything else in the human condition, I can kind of understand. I'm not sexually attracted to children, right? So I don't see that happening. But like, if I could, put $1 million in my pocket, do you think I might be willing to be a little bit flexible with some of my lofty moral standards if I could put, $1 million in my pocket? God forbid. God forbid. Okay, Tucker says the last 2 years have been really hard on experts. Haven't the last 2 years been hard on everyone? But let's hear more.
Adult stuff like war and disease and the economy, really the only things that matter. The assumption in Washington has for many years been that you should not worry about it. Don't sweat the details. That's not your role as a citizen and as a voter. We don't have that kind of democracy, the kind where you might actually participate. No, your job is to trust the experts and their conclusions and then obey them. But COVID kind of blew that up. If there's one thing we learned from that disaster.
Okay, so is that really what we're being told? Trust the experts and don't question them. Put a couple of dollars in 40's thong and he'll do anything. I remember my therapist said, you will sell yourself out for so little money. Other people would demand tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars to sell out the way that you'll sell out for a 50. Sad but true. Mein Moral Führer. I can walk my moral Führer. Okay.
Disaster. It's that public policy experts very often had no clue what they were talking about. Your hippie aunt in Mendocino County knew a lot more about how to beat a flu virus than your average virologist on CNN.
Yeah, is that true? I mean, how much has Tucker Carlson, paid attention to virologists, right? I mean, my impression from reading the academic literature is that the virologists have done a reasonably good job, an imperfect job.
Your aunt would tell you to go outside, get some exercise, some sunlight, some fresh air, stop eating junk food, turn off your computer once in a while, spend time with other people.
Okay, that's not great advice, say, during the COVID pandemic. Some of it's good advice, but it's not really going to do a whole heck of a lot to stop you from getting COVID. So what were the instructions? During the early part of COVID, the instructions were to socially distance. And then we got vaccines, and the instructions were to take vaccines. And yes, I do believe that the COVID vaccine reduces COVID transmission and it reduces COVID severity. Does it perfectly eliminate COVID transmission? Obviously not. Can you get the COVID vaccines and still die of COVID? Yes, it's not perfect, but it does seem to be a help.
Be healthy. That advice worked. The experts, by contrast, made you get the vaccine, and that did not work. So by March...
That's horrible. That is stupid. That is just brain dead. Right? The evidence is overwhelming that COVID vaccines do reduce the severity and the transmission of COVID. Now, the people most likely to die of COVID are over age 70. So how much difference is that going to make to their mortality rates if they decide to start on an exercise program or a diet program? Okay, maybe have a modest effect, but people, say, under age 60 were not, a great risk, generally speaking, of dying from COVID.
March of 2021, people are starting to figure this out. Anyone who was paying attention in America understood that the experts, many of them, were full of it. And it was exactly at that moment that the Atlantic magazine in Washington published a piece pushing back against the growing consensus. That story was entitled, "Following Your Gut Isn't the Right Way to Go." It's hard to think of a funnier headline, really, mostly because it's so spectacularly absurd. You should always trust your gut. Obvious.
That's terrible advice. You should not always trust your gut. There are some circumstances where you should trust your gut, and there are other circumstances where you should not trust your gut. Okay, let me talk about myself. I should not trust my gut when it comes to watching sports. I love to watch sports. So if I just followed my gut, I would watch a lot more sports than would be a good way for me to use my time. Damn, Luke Croft just put down 2 pounds, and he says, "Here is 2 pounds, you're mine now." It's true. I mean, how could I say no? I mean, as long as whatever you're asked doesn't go against God's law or man's law, as long as it doesn't go against the Torah. All right? But aside from that, putting these $2 in my thong, yeah, I'll pretty much do anything as long as it's in alignment with God's will for my life. Okay, so Tucker Carlson says you can't go wrong following your gut. So let me just think about all the awful ways that I go wrong following my gut. All right, you shouldn't stick it in crazy. Right, I've done that like way too much. Right, if I followed my gut, I would have like a dozen mulatto children. All right, I like the sisters. I could try to deny it. I could stand up here and say, oh, I would never, give in to jungle fever. I don't even know what jungle fever is, but I would be lying. I love the sisters. I do. I love their shape. I love their sassy personality. I love, their outgoing attitude in life. I just love the sisters. And if I followed my gut, like, I would have a dozen mulatto children, right? If I followed my gut, I would be, fornicating with, all sorts of women all over town. if I followed my gut, I would be watching pornography. This is what kills me. Right? I'm coming up on 10 years no fap. Right? So June 19th of 2023, that will be 10 years no fap. All right. Now, shortly after I went no fap, I finally got an HD monitor. So finally I get a high definition monitor, and I've given up looking at porn. I mean, I haven't gotten to experience like how awesome pornography could be in HD, let alone the metaverse. Right? I've never gotten to experience that. If I followed my gut, I'd be experiencing that. But it's terrible for me, so I don't do it. But I love it, man. Absolutely love the porn. You know, at certain times, certain places, you know, I didn't love it day in, day out, every day. You know, for months, years of my life, I wanted nothing to do with it. But there are times and there are places where I just absolutely love the porn. And if I followed my gut, I'd be porning. So basically, in matters of sex and love, romance, romantic excitement, erotic thrills, you know, breaking erotic taboos, you know, following my love map. All right, following my gut is just terrible, terrible advice. Making money. All right, I am not someone who's made a lot of good decisions with regard to making money. All right, so if I just followed my gut, I'd be in desperately awful financial situation. Here's a good example of my approach to money. So my ex-girlfriend, Holly Randall, was being interviewed on a podcast, and she mentioned that she usually dates broke writers, and she usually ends up paying for them, and most of them resent it when she ends up paying for them, but for some reason it didn't bother Luke. And that's absolutely right. I remember in the mid-1980s, I was listening to a story on NPR from Andrei Kajeshku, that Eastern European commentator on NPR, and he read some story about some bloke who realized very early on in his life that he was doomed to forever living off women. So if I followed my gut, I would live off women. I'd get a rich wife. You know, I've had various like rich women wanted to marry me. And if I followed my gut, I would have married a rich woman. Because, you know, I don't like to work. I only want to do what I want to do. So when it comes to sex, love, romance, relationships, eroticism, following my gut is terrible advice. When it comes to earning money, saving money, the way I conduct myself vis-a-vis money, like following my gut is terrible advice. I would just naturally pursue pleasure. Pleasure if I followed my gut. I have to force myself into the bloody cold shower every morning because I know it's good for me. I know that the high that you get coming out of the cold shower is equivalent to doing cocaine. So, but I have to force myself. If I followed my gut, I would not be taking cold showers. Where else do I tend to make terrible decisions? Well, I would eat too much, right? I have to put, you know, I have to make certain steps to stay spiritually aligned so I don't overeat, right? I am 6 foot, 170 pounds. Ideally, I'd like to get down to 165 to 170, but for about 25 years, from about 1993 until about 2014, I usually weighed about 180 to 185 pounds. So if I followed my gut, I'd weigh a lot more. I would eat more junk food. So there are just so many ways that if I followed my gut, I would produce more shocking YouTube shows. I'd bring on the most shocking guests possible. I'd do more shows like the Saturday Night Massacre with Nick Fuentes and Baked Alaska and Jim Goad. And who are those other blokes who came on? Sean, you know, all those blokes, Beardson Beardley. All right, I'd do shocking shows like that if I were following my gut. Right, so I don't know about you, but my gut is frequently a terrible guide for life. So Tucker Carlson saying, yeah, I'd bring on the Goyim Defense League. We just debate the Jewish question every night if I followed my gut. So I don't know about you. Tell me, throw down in the chat. Where is your gut a good guide to life, and where is your gut a terrible guide? So if I followed my gut, I would vastly overestimate my own importance, my own abilities, my own wisdom, my own sagacity, my own talent, my own profundity, right? If I followed my gut, I would just be even more narcissistic, more self-absorbed, more grandiose, more delusional than I am right now. So there's a time and a place to follow your gut, and there's a time and a place to not follow your gut. Right? So this idea, just follow your gut, is just terrible, terrible advice. There's all sorts of, counterintuitive wisdom out there. And also we have evolutionarily evolved so that now all of us live in a situation of evolutionary mismatch. For example, why do people have such a huge fear of public speaking? Because for tens and tens of thousands of years, we lived in small tribes where we'd live around the same, 30 to 150 max people for almost all our lives. And so the chances of something going wrong if you were to speak publicly in front of your group are so big compared to the possible rewards for speaking publicly in front of your group that we have this evolutionary mismatch now where we just tend to be, filled with trepidation about speaking publicly. We have an evolutionary mismatch in that we, tend to eat too much because we evolved to just, eat everything we could. We evolutionarily evolved to boink everything that we could boink, to kill, everyone who annoyed us or threatened us, to, eat and boink and kill. All right. And so we all have to deal with a situation of evolutionary mismatch. Yeah, look, just because old dudes have wanted to blow me, not just old dudes, very young, handsome men have wanted to blow me too. Right? That doesn't mean I'm gay. Right? And my 40s gut, yeah, my gut told me to do it, but it was only thanks to, my faith in God that I was able to say no. Do I think I'll ever marry? Yes. Yes. I'm going to get married. I'm going to have a family. I'm going to reproduce. Look, there's an ordinary world out there that somehow I've yet to find. I mean, here I am. I came in from a rainy Thursday on the avenue. I thought I heard you talking softly. Came home. I turned on the lights, the TV, and the radio. Still, I can't escape the ghost of you. I mean, what has happened to it all? Crazy, some say. Where is the life that I recognize? Gone away. But I won't cry for yesterday. There's an ordinary world. Somehow I have to find. And as I try to make my way to the ordinary world, I will learn to survive. Passion or coincidence once prompted you to say, pride will tear us both apart. Well, now pride's gone out the window, crossed the rooftops, run away, left me in the vacuum of my heart. What is happening to me? Crazy, some say. Where is my friend when I need you most? Gone away. Papers in the roadside tell of suffering and greed. Fear today, forgot tomorrow. Ooh, here beside the news of holy war and holy need, ours is just a little sorrowed talk. But there's an ordinary world out there somehow I have to find. Visions of his crusty-lipped old rabbi prevented Ford from growing through with it. Do I think I'd be a good father? Yes, I'd be a great father. Right? I mean, womanizers are good with kids, man. I'm playful. Right? People, blokes who be with a lot of Sheilas, they're good with kids because, they're playful, all right? If you're going to have success with a lot of Sheilas, you have to be playful, and kids like, playful adults. But enough about me.
It is the one thing that will never betray you. But the Atlantic magazine...
That's terrible advice. This idea that your gut is the one thing that will never betray you, your gut will constantly betray you. Not in all areas, right? In some areas, your gut is going to be excellent, right? Some people are really smart with business. Some people make really good decisions with regard to love, sex, and romance. Other people make really good decisions with money, with investing, with working, with choosing friends. I make really good decisions with choosing friends. I have excellent taste in friends. But as I mentioned, there are other areas where I just have terrible taste, right? there's none of us who is immune to the baleful allures of every situation that could come along. Like if you're a bloke, there are erotic scenarios which will leave you absolutely helpless. So we're all vulnerable, and we have to have clarity about where we can trust our gut, where we can't trust our gut. So how do we learn when to trust and when not to trust? In other words, how can we improve our emotional intelligence? I'm so glad that you asked that.
To improve your emotional intelligence. I'm your host, Dr. Donnelly Snipes. So let's start out by defining what emotional intelligence is. Emotional intelligence is your ability to identify feelings within yourself, to manage those feelings, not only to deal with distress, but also to increase eustress or happy feelings, and your ability to respond appropriately to other people's emotions, your ability to empathize, identify what they're feeling, and respond in an appropriate manner. The first activity you can do in order to improve your emotional intelligence is to improve your emotional vocabulary. Improve your ability to identify emotions within yourself. A lot of times we have gotten lazy about how we identify our feelings. We're feeling happy, mad, sad, glad, or afraid. And that doesn't nearly capture the depth and breadth of emotions that we're able to feel. So it's important to start using scaled emotion words. So you have on a scale, on one end, you're feeling okay. In the middle, you're feeling good. And on this side over here, you're feeling wonderful. So try to get away from using the blah words, the words that just come kind of automatically, and find different synonyms, like you're feeling fabulous or wonderful or amazing or distressed. Those are words that we're not used to using, but it helps us identify more accurately where we are. Make a feelings scrapbook. Identify on each page a different feeling, and then write down, what does that feeling look like in you? What does your face look like? What do your nonverbals look like? What does that look like in you? What does it feel like in you when you have that feeling, when you feel curious, when you feel anxious, when you feel angry or depressed? What do those things feel like in your body? Then what triggers those feelings? For each one, identify what triggers curiosity in you, or what triggers joy and happiness in you. This morning, we had 2 huge blackbirds on our deck, and I love having them around because they chase away the hawks, and the hawks kill my chickens. So, we're friends, but I don't see them very often, and I can't remember the last time they actually came to the feeder. So I'm a little curious about why they came to my feeder, but I was also joyful to see them. They are such big, magnificent creatures. So if I were doing a feeling scrapbook, I would put that under awe as well as potentially under curiosity. So what triggers that feeling in you?
So do you have a feelings scrapbook? I mean, please share in the chat. Talk to me about your feelings scrapbook, all right? So we can get more sophisticated about how the outside world works. We can get more sophisticated and more accurate to reality models of the outside world, right? More sophisticated top-down models of how the outside world works. And we can have more sophisticated models that more approximate reality bottom up from how we work. So we can develop our emotional intelligence, and we can sharpen our gut reactions so that we can get more clarity about which situations where we can trust our gut and where we should distrust our gut. Could 40 be seduced by a woman today? My God, I am armed by God's immutable, eternal moral law, right? I mean, you think I would just throw away the thousands of years of insights of Torah for some, fleeting pleasure? Come on, man. Elliot says, my feelings look like an outbreak of monkeypox. Laponia says, my gut tells me to raw dog a Brazilian prostitute in an alley. What would Tucker tell me to do? Okay, let's see. What would Tucker tell you to do?
Wanted you to know that your natural instincts are, in fact, worthless. The experts had a rough year, the magazine conceded, but we still have to trust them. Right. Actually, we don't have to trust them. And on big questions of public policy, we absolutely should not trust them. It's a democracy. But Washington is continuing to demand that we do trust them. Okay. Why? There may be a reason. Maybe COVID isn't the...
He's touching on something really important here, that experts do have more and more power as the world becomes more and more complicated, and it is beyond the ability of ordinary people to comprehend whether experts are telling us something that's right or wrong. So as we live in a world that's more and more governed by expertise, it is taking the power away from the people, from the populace, from democracy, right? From the European Union to the United States, we have more and more power put into the hands of experts whose specialized learning is simply beyond what regular people can critique. So this is a tremendous challenge for democracy, and the problem of expertise and the challenge that it places for democracy is the subject of numerous articles and books by the philosopher Stephen Turner. It's a topic that I've gone into in great depth on the show. So there is a high IQ, serious way to discuss expertise.
Only big project they have in mind for us, a project the experts will justify on MSNBC, and indeed it's not. There is the climate change agenda. And the climate change agenda is the single most ambitious.
So when it comes to something incredibly complicated like climate change, it is so complicated that no one is an expert in climate change. At most, people can have expertise in one sliver of what gets to be called climate change. And yet we're being told to, upend our lives and upend our economy and, upend our traditional ways of doing things because of climate change. But the complicated nature of climate change is far beyond what any individual can possibly do, right? At most, you can have expertise in one sliver of climate change, and then you have to depend upon the expertise of dozens of other people. People know the most about their day-to-day life. They should not think about the big issues, otherwise they come to crazy conclusions. Well, no, there's nothing wrong with thinking about the big issues if you enjoy it. If it drives you crazy, then don't do it. Like, some people would be better off paying less attention to the news. I enjoy interacting with the news. I enjoy reading the news, right? If you enjoy it, if you can handle it responsibly, then take in some news. But if you can't handle it responsibly, right? If it drives you crazy, then you have to change your news sources and dial back on your consumption.
Effort to remake human civilization in all recorded history. And it's coming. In fact, it's already in progress. The only reason that millions and millions of Americans aren't protesting in the streets tonight over this effort to completely overturn their lives is that on some level, many people still do trust the experts, at least on climate change. But should they? We were pondering that this morning when we saw that the world's most famous climate change expert, Greta Thunberg of Sweden, just deleted a tweet she wrote in June of 2018. Here it is, quote, "A top climate scientist is warning that climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. The scientist, of course, was a Harvard professor, so obviously that prediction was going to be correct. But here we are still
Okay, so my position is we can neither automatically trust nor automatically distrust the experts. Right? The experts aren't always right. They're not always wrong. The people are not always right. The people are not always wrong. There is no easy solution to trying to detect when we should have trust in the experts and when we should not. So it is a tremendous challenge, and it's a tremendous challenge for democracy because experts have more and more power, and their expertise is less and less fathomable to us as expertise becomes increasingly specialized.
Driving our Silverados and still alive, and some of us are still happy. So it does make you wonder if Greta Thunberg, the greatly revered Greta Thunberg, a perennial finalist for the Nobel Peace Prize, could have gotten that so wrong. What else have the climate experts gotten wrong? And how long have they been getting it wrong? Well, fortunately, the Competitive Enterprise Institute has done the research on this, and it turns out these people have been very wrong for a very long time. 1969.
So one way of understanding communism and the varieties of socialism is that these forms of government are ruled by experts. So the more free market you get, right, the less, generally speaking, you have rule by experts. So my inclination is that I prefer, generally speaking, a freer market and less rule by experts. So communism and all the major forms of socialism are forms of rule by experts, right? I prefer the decentralized free market. That's That's my innate tendency.
The New York Times was printing climate hysteria. From an expert called Paul Ehrlich, quote, "We must realize that unless we are extremely lucky, everybody will disappear in a cloud of blue steam in 20 years. That was Paul Ehrlich in 1969. Well, here it is, 2023, and that same Paul Ehrlich, who's now 90 and still publishing books and still being cited on 60 Minutes, is still telling us that we're all going to die. Now, clearly, Paul Ehrlich had some sort of traumatic childhood he's been inflicting on the rest of us for over 50 years. And for over 50 years, his fellow experts have taken him seriously. Now, back then, of course, climate change didn't mean global warming. It meant...
So Paul Ehrlich is famous. He has a prestigious role in society, and he has been wrong about every major prediction that he's ever made. So there's no connection between fame, success, and being right? You can be right and not have fame and success. You can have fame and success and be as consistently wrong as Paul Ehrlich.
And a new ice age. In 1970, the Boston Globe reported, quote, "Scientists predict a new ice age by 21st century. According to the Globe, air pollution may obliterate the sun and cause a new ice age in the first third of the next century." An ice age. In 1972, Brown University's science department sent a letter to the White House explaining that they had deep concern with the future of the world because this ice age falls within the rank of processes which produced the last ice age. 2 years later, in 1974, The Guardian reported that, quote, "spy satellites show new ice age is coming fast." And the report cited, just for moral weight, analysis carried out at Columbia University. Then, a few years later, 1977, the actor Leonard Nimoy was not a science expert technically, but played one at one point on television, shot this video.
"We are unprepared for the next advance. The result could be hunger and death on a scale unprecedented in all of history. What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought. During the lifetime of our grandchildren, Arctic cold and perpetual snow could turn most of the inhabitable portions of our planet into a polar desert."
Hunger and death on an unprecedented scale. Someone else with the tragic childhood he inflicted on the rest of us. But by the early 1980s, when the ice didn't arrive, well, the experts decided the problem wasn't too much cold, it was too much heat. It was global warming. In 1989, the Associated Press ran this story, quote, "A senior UN environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. In other words, 23 years ago. That same year, 1989, a climate expert called Jim Hansen met with a reporter from Ceylon. According to Ceylon, Hansen explained that within 20 or 30 years, quote, "the West Side Highway," which runs along the Hudson River in Manhattan, "will be underwater." Underwater. We checked tonight, and actually it's congested, but still a road. Then in March of 2000, the Independent newspaper ran a piece explaining that snowfalls are now just a thing of the past. And we're quoting, "Snow is starting to disappear from our lives." The piece quoted a climate expert claiming that, quote, "children just aren't going to know what snow is." No idea what snow is. It'll be a relic not of the Ice Age, but of the Great Inferno.
You guys pumped for March Madness, right? The National Collegiate Athletics Association men's basketball tournament. Just crazy things happening. I mean, Princeton today defeated number 2 ranked Arizona, and there was one other major upset. I mean, just crazy things happening. And I used to date a woman whose name was Oral Roberts, so I thought Oral Roberts would do much better than they've done. Unfortunately, they got thrashed. But keep hope alive. Right? UCLA is starting at about 70 minutes. So as a Bruin, I'm supporting them. Little let down by Oral Roberts, but can you believe that Princeton beat Arizona? Crazy times
Of global warming. Then, in 2004, amazingly, civilization still existed. The Guardian predicted that, quote, "major European cities will be sunk beneath rising seas as Britain is plunged into a Siberian climate by 2020. which is a little confusing because global warming doesn't typically produce a Siberian climate. And it was around this time that they decided, hey, we don't want to get pinned down on the details. Will it be too hot? Will it be too cold? We don't want to say. Something bad's going to happen, so we're going to call it climate change. And that paved the way for Al Gore, who in 2006 released his famous documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. And the beauty of An Inconvenient Truth is, now that it's been, well, inconveniently more than 15 years since it came out, we can fact-check its claims. Here's the trailer.
If you look at the 10 hottest years ever measured, they've all occurred in the last 14 years.
And the hottest of all was 2005. This is Patagonia, 75 years ago, and the same glacier today. This is Mount Kilimanjaro, 30 years ago, and last year. Within the decade, there will be no more snows of Kilimanjaro.
Al Gore also said there would be no ice in the Arctic. He quoted researchers, climate researchers, experts, and he explained that, quote, the North Pole will be ice-free in the summer by 2013 because of man-made global warming. Now, it does take a certain level of chutzpah to make a prediction that precise, and Al Gore made many of them, and all of them turned out to be wrong. And for a normal person, that would be a cue, maybe it's time to retire. I'm rich on Google stock, maybe I could just stop talking because, of course, I've been disgraced by my own foolish predictions. But no, he kept going, and he was helped in that by the entire news media. It makes you wonder why. News organizations exist to bring you the news, to assess whether things are true or not. But if all of them collude to hide lying, you have to ask, is there something else going on here? We'll let you decide. We do know that by 2006, NBC News informed the world that, quote, a leading U.S. climate researcher says the world has a 10-year window till 2016, a window of opportunity to take decisive action on global warming and avert catastrophe. Well, of course, by their predicted date, Donald Trump became president, but that's not what they were predicting. In 2008, the Associated Press reported that according to a top NASA scientist, in 5 to 10 years, the Arctic will be free of sea ice in the summer. That didn't happen, but of course no one was ever held to account for bad predictions, so they just kept going. John Kerry, now our climate czar, cited that very same science in 2009. Watch.
You have sea ice, which is melting at a rate that the Arctic Ocean now increasingly is exposed. In 5 years, scientists predict we will have the first ice-free Arctic summer.
What's hilarious is this is a guy who's never had a job. He's only been in politics. He's never done one useful thing. He's not a scientist. He's never done research. He's actually not an expert, but because he's way more aggressive than you are, and because he has access to the media, which amplify his claims, he poses as one. Now, what's strange about the prediction you just heard is that John Kerry's prediction contradicts Barack Obama's famous climate prediction from a year earlier. You probably remember this.
Because if we are willing to work for it and fight for it and believe in it, then I am absolutely certain that generations from now, we will be able to look back and tell our children that this was the moment when we began to provide care for the sick and good jobs to the jobless. This was the moment when the rise of the oceans began to slow and our planet began to heal.
No, Obama got it wrong. This is the moment, all right, when the ocean tides start to recede and the planet begins to heal. It wasn't that moment, it's this moment, right? The time of healing is now, right? So how do we heal, right? We become emotionally intelligent.
What memories do you have about that feeling? Think back into your past. When have you felt that feeling before? That will help you not only identify what that feeling looks like and feels like, but it will also help you recognize when you may be acting or reacting from something that happened in your past. If something's happening in the present that reminds you of the past, you start to feel depressed, you're like, okay, I know why I'm feeling so much more depressed about this than I would expect to. It reminds me of blah. For distressful emotions, what helps manage it? What can you do to tolerate that distress? Feelings are like your body's smoke alarm. Your feelings are there to tell you when there's a threat, when there's something to be happy about, when there's something to be curious about. It's your body's alarm system. You don't want to get rid of your feelings. You don't want to suppress your feelings. But
Right. You don't want to suppress your gut. You don't want to suppress your feelings. All right. Gut feelings are synonymous, right? You should listen to your gut. Doesn't mean you should always follow your gut. I mean, I listen to Laponius, but do I always follow Laponius? Heck no. Heck no. Like he said last week, that last week was the time when the ocean tides would begin to recede and the planet would begin to heal. Said, no, Laponius, you're just jumping the gun, mate. It's not, it's not then. All right. The healing begins now. So I listen to my feelings. I listen to my gut. I even listen to Laponius, right? But I don't slavishly follow any of these. All right.
Sad to watch that. All the cheering people, they seem so sincere. He's going to save the world. He can control the weather. He's Jesus. But in fact, the global healing Obama promised at the beginning of his first term never came, and neither did the global destruction. Here, by the way, is Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah, my favorite part of the Obama years were all the racial healing. That was a great commentary.
Another great predictor of things, saying that by 2014, the Statue of Liberty will soon be underwater.
You know what I tell people? This wakes them into. Here in the New York metropolitan area, I say, if we lose the ice caps, you know how high the water will be? I say, maybe a couple of feet. No, it would come up to the Statue of Liberty's elbow, the one that's holding the Declaration of Independence. That's where the water line will be.
So back in 2004, on the set of Lesbian Swellfest 17, I think it was, I met Haley Rivers, and we stayed in touch. Just an amazing actress, and very, very learned in English literature. Her mother was a school teacher. Her father wasn't around, so she was a bit of a wild child. And when she was finished with being an actress in that particular genre, we started going out. And so on our first date, I took her to a nice kosher dinner, and then I brought her back to my place, and I had a copy of The Day After Tomorrow, which is all about climate change. So I wanted to get informed. She wanted to get informed. So, I slipped on the movie, and then, I arranged the blankets and the pillows, and we just started cuddling. And so one thing led to another, and we stopped paying as much attention to the movie. But whenever people talk about climate change, I just associate climate change with Haley Rivers. Now, we had, a wonderful couple of months together. I thought I could handle it, but I couldn't handle her body of work. Like, at first it was fine, but then there was that scene that she did with those two African Americans, and it distressed me. And luckily I had a mentor in Orthodox Judaism who showed me that the important thing is to look on the bright side. He said, here's the good news about that scene. You know that Haley is not racist. But all this climate change talk, it just takes me back to Haley Rivers. What the hell? I'm just all flummoxed now.
That man's a scientist. And of course, climate does change. It has always changed. In fact, the landscape we live in now is formed by climate change. The glaciers are a product of climate change. The climate is changing now. It never stops changing. That is a process that we didn't cause and that we can't control to any great degree. We'll never be able to control. And there are upsides to it and downsides to it. By the way, if the Earth is indeed getting warmer, and it seems to be, well, then that will make more arable land in places like Canada and Northern Europe. So, like everything in this life, in the temporal world, it's a mixed blessing. But you only hear the downsides.
And an important question from the chat, did I shag any Sheilas when I had the full beard? Yes. Yes. Maybe it gave me an air of more solemnity, more authority. Maybe I came across as more masculine. But yeah, my beard They said they didn't like it, right? I can't remember any woman that I was with who said she liked my beard, but she was still there. She was still with me.
Which tells you a lot. It tells you this is not science, it's manipulation. These aren't reports from the experts. These are threats. Here's Joe Biden.
That's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger. The latest climate report, nothing less than, quote, code red for humanity. Let me say it again. Code red for humanity.
Code red for humanity. Of course, he never explains what that means. You're going to have to check your book of science to find out. Of course, in the details, they don't offer as many details now because they've all been wrong. But to the extent they do, they are provably wrong over time. So the question is, why are we still being bullied by these people? It has nothing to do with saving the earth.
Okay, so good opening segment there from Tucker Carlson, an evergreen segment. He could have recorded that weeks ago and got on vacation. But I think generally, good job there, Tucker. All right. The main topic for tonight is Donald Trump, a fascist. Terrific article here in the New Republic by a leftist, reviewing a book by a leftist professor. Fascism Comes to America, a century of obsession in politics and in culture.
The welfare liberals changed this by strategically utilizing the European political spectrum to define themselves as the moderate center. To do so, they needed an extreme right wing, and they found one in fascism. By developing and promoting an American political spectrum that placed fascism on the extreme right and communism on the extreme left, liberals were able to present themselves and their platform, limited government intervention at home, support for democracy abroad, as the embodiment of a rational, vital center. Put another way, during and after World War II, fascism became a useful foil against which centrist liberals defined themselves and justified the creation of an expanded welfare state and U.S. empire that, for the first time in history, spanned much of the globe. From the late 1940s to the late 1960s, fascism, which surpassed Nazism and National Socialism in common usage, had a relatively stable meaning. It referred to the extreme right wing of the recently adopted political spectrum. Nevertheless, one must be careful not to overstate the term's import. For most of this period, it was communism, not fascism, that preoccupied the American mind. In fact, it was primarily German exiles like Albert Einstein, Theodor Adorno, and Herbert Marcuse who kept the term in circulation. Things changed, or rather returned to their pre-World War II state, during the Vietnam War. Anti-war baby boomers, who had not fought fascism firsthand, but who had grown up in its dark shadow, once again started to apply the term to politicians across the political spectrum, from Lyndon Baines Johnson to Richard Nixon. Fascism thus retained its exceedingly negative valence, but was, Kukluk shows, untethered from the right, and even uncoupled from any perceptive characteristics. If you really didn't like someone or something, you called them fascist. This is not to say that those who used the term never had noble intentions, especially from the perspective of the left. In several instances, left-wing thinkers concluded that they needed to employ fascism to help Americans appreciate that sometimes the policies of their liberal capitalist society uncomfortably mirrored those of Nazi Germany. In particular, when Angela Davis used the term in her 1971 essay, Political Prisoners, Prisons, and Black Liberation, to inveigh against the fascist content of the ruthless aggression in Indochina and the fascist stronghold in the prisons, she was trying to force people to confront painful and profound instances of violence, oppression, and injustice. But Davis's form of use never predominated, and in general, for much of the 1960s onward, innumerable people deployed the term in innumerable ways. Everyone, from Ronald Reagan to Bill Clinton, from Barack Obama to George W. Bush, has at one point or another been deemed a fascist. Fascism, in other words, has not generally functioned as a term of analysis. As Kukluk demonstrates, it doesn't have much empirical content. It is instead a part of language that is more evaluative than factual. For most of its American history, fascism has been an insult, a performative reflection of the user's desire to make the object of their derision disreputable. Kukluk is therefore skeptical of the mounds of scholarly research that have utilized fascist to describe governments, movements, and people not linked to Mussolini's Italy or Hitler's Germany. Like much research into political topics, this work, he claims, continues politics by other methods and displays standard sentiments as much as disinterested information. Kukluk is especially critical of attempts to read fascism into the American past, which many scholars have done since the late 1960s. Finding fascism in U.S. history, he warns, distances U.S. citizens from their own past by insisting that dangerous challenges must have migrated from overseas. There are manifold homegrown American phenomena that shaped the past for the worse: genocidal racism, rapacious militarism, and a violent obsession with incarcerating minorities were not fascist inventions, and we hardly need to import a term with a foreign valence to explain, and thus implicitly detach ourselves from, that history.
Right, so this is a left-wing critique, but just making the point that fascism is not something that's real in American political history. Looking at the chat, why did you get rid of the beard, 40? It would probably look a lot better now that your hair is white. I got rid of my beard towards the end of in December of 2011. I needed money. I needed to move, and I needed to come up with first and last month rent, and my family really hated my beard, and they were afraid that it would retard my growth as an Alexander Technique teacher as I was launching my practice. And so I acceded to their wishes, went clean-shaven, and I did it in exchange for about borrowing a couple of $1,000s. So I sold my beard for 30 pieces of silver. Sad but true.
Why has fascism been able to serve such a protean function? According to Kukluk, it's because fascism hasn't been, and never was, a real threat in the United States. As he usefully reminds us, living, breathing Nazis, the German-American Bundists, and William Dudley Pelley's Silver Legion of the 1930s, George Lincoln Rockwell's American Nazi Party of the 1960s, or the neo-Nazis of the 21st century, were all minuscule groups that never came close to wielding political power. The conditions that enabled fascism's rise, a broad experience of total war and a powerful left on the verge of seizing power, were just never present here. It was precisely this lack of threat that allowed fascism to become a generalized term of vilification.
Okay, so you have to understand everything if you want to be wise and effective. You have to understand everything in its particular context. So let's say you and I run into each other on the street. And I remember about 5 years ago, I had all these back spasms. So I couldn't lift my feet more than about an inch above the ground. I would just like hobble like a 90-year-old man as I, tried to make my way to a chiropractor and to get an x-ray, and went to, other acupuncturists, like I was trying everything. And these muscle spasms just had me in an absolute grasp. If you'd run into me on the street during that time, I would not have been very happy or friendly or outgoing. I was in absolute agony. So too, if you run into me when I'm running late, I'm unlikely to be, happy, friendly, chatty, all right? If I'm running late for something important to me, I'm just going to blow you off. So if you want to understand the rise of Christianity, you have to understand that Christianity rose as the Roman Empire fell. If you want to understand the Talmud, you have to understand that it was largely composed under the rule of the Roman Empire, which was very much a legal empire. And so Judaism developed in all sorts of legal ways, developing a legal code influenced by the Roman Empire. Jews took up philosophy in the 11th, 12th, 13th century because they were profoundly influenced by Arabs who began translating the ancient Greek philosophers into modern tongue. And so you had simultaneously a wave of philosophy through Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Now, over the past 200 years, the world has increasingly become secular. So until about 250 years ago, the fortunes of Christians and the fortunes of Jews were largely inverse for about 1700 years. All right, when the fortunes of Christians rose, generally speaking, the fortunes of Jews fell. When the fortunes of Jews rose, the fortunes of Christians fell. That was the pattern for about 1600 years. And then, starting about 200 years ago, with the rise of secularism, right, the fortunes of religious Jews and religious Christians have, risen and fallen largely together. So you have to understand everything in its time and place, and that includes fascism, right? Fascism was a political movement between World War I and World War II that took power in Italy, and there's a good argument also to be made that the German Nazis, you can understand them as fascists, but those really the only... Italy was definitely fascist, Germany possibly fascist. Those are the only two real fascist regimes we've ever had, and they took place in reaction to the rise of totalitarian communism. Without the rise of totalitarian communism, you never would have gotten fascism. So everything takes place in a particular time and place. All right, that's called historicism, understanding things in their context.
If there were actual fascists running around, you wouldn't go around calling everyone fascist. Another reason fascism has been so protean is that, unlike liberalism and conservatism, it's not a living ideology, and never really was in the United States. No self-identified fascist is taken seriously in American society. There are
no self-identifying fascist is taken seriously anywhere in the world today. Not in Europe, not in England, France, Germany, Scandinavian countries, not in Russia or China or Japan, right? There aren't any fascist intellectuals who enjoy public respectability.
There are no genuinely fascist op-ed columnists, no fascist TV commentators, no fascist celebrities, no fascist elected officials. You're unlikely to find people reading actual fascists outside of European history courses. When a right-wing provocateur like Matt Walsh refers to himself as a theocratic fascist, he does so with a wink and nod, knowing that he's using a term sure to rile up liberals and leftists. Fascism is a dead ideology, which ironically has allowed it to rise from the grave in easily manipulable, zombified form.
That's a great point. Fascism is a dead ideology. It's absolutely dead. And so this absurd specter of all these intellectuals calling Donald Trump fascist or the Republican Party increasingly fascist is absurd.
Beyond its versatility, there are several additional reasons why fascism has become such a powerful term in American discourse. First, as Angela Davis's use of the word suggests, sometimes left-wing thinkers have determined that to impel Americans to confront...
So, what is fascism? It's a between-war revolutionary movement that reacted to the rise of communism. If you go to Merriam-Webster Dictionary, fascism is a political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts the nation and often the race above the individual and stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. And according to Wikipedia, fascism is a far-right, authoritarian, ultranationalist political ideology and movement characterized by a dictatorial leader, centralized autocracy, militarism, forcible suppression of opposition, belief in a natural social hierarchy, subordination of individual interests to the perceived good of the nation and the race, and strong regimentation of society and the economy.
Difficult truths, only the word fascist will do. Using the term further enables individuals to indicate that they're one of the good guys. When anti-war activists identified George W. Bush with Hitler in the 2000s, they were not so much making a careful historical analogy as signaling their hatred of Republican warmongers and, in most cases, their allegiance to the Democratic Party. Moreover, in eras like our own, in which rampant polarization coexists with a political structure in which most citizens have no influence, it's only natural for people to construct struggles that give their lives political meaning. Identifying fascists allows Americans living today to imagine themselves as part of a consequential world historical fight between good and evil. It's an ahistorical framing that gives meaning through romantic nostalgia and provides psychic succor to all of us who have no influence in the corridors of power.
All right, so eventually all of us, have no influence in the corridors of power, but we want to feel alive and we want to feel important. And so we have these various ways of propping ourselves up. So some people get a sense of importance out of calling other people fascists, and other people get a sense of importance from imagining that they are fascist. But either way, you're talking about cosplay. You're talking about people, dressing up and pretending so that they can feel some excitement. Remember, what was that Jack Nicholson movie? All right, Carnal Knowledge. And remember the end scene when he's with this prostitute, right? And, she's just not saying the right words, right? And so the Jack Nicholson character has become so depraved, right? He can only perform under a particular fantasy. And the hooker isn't giving him, the fantasy that he needs. So his ability to experience eroticism has shriveled to, one particular heavily regimented, like a fascist erotic template. That's what he's developed. We've all got a love map. We've all got an erotic template, but your erotic template can be more flexible or more limited. And the Jack Nicholson character at the end of Carnal Knowledge, right, his erotic template had become severely limited. So I forget what this has to do with fascism.
The contemporary fascism debate is thus about much more than fascism. It's about people's sense of self in a moment of anti-popular politics. And it is for this reason that the debate, which on its surface is as academic as a discussion could possibly be, has engendered so much rancor. When you attack someone's identification of fascism, you're attacking more than a political diagnosis. You're attacking their very identity. Nonetheless, something did change with the rise of Donald Trump, whose success reopened the floodgates of fascism talk. Not since the 1930s and 1940s have the literati obsessed so much over fascism, and not since the 1950s and 1960s has the term been so associated with the political right. At first glance, it's not obvious why so many more critics identified Trump as fascist instead of, say, George W. Bush. Bush, after all, established government bodies.
So the Jack Nicholson character in Carnal Knowledge says, "Is this an ultimatum? Answer me, you ball-busting, castrating son of a C-word bitch. Is this an ultimatum or not?" Then the bloke played by, is it Art Garfunkel, talks, "She was the best-looking girl at that whole mixer. I'll say that for her. Her tits were too small. Yeah, I was thinking that. The hell with her. But her legs were great." Oh man, that was an amazing movie. Chilling movie. Jonathan, did you feel her up yet? Come on, I like this girl. I don't want to ruin things. Okay, back to the New Republic.
Like Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the most Gestapo-like organization in the country, and the Department of Homeland Security, whose name uncomfortably echoes the German Heimatschutz, a term associated with the far right.
Another lines from Carnal Knowledge. Sandy says, please, Susan, sometimes I want to do it, and then a second later, I don't want to do it. Let's do it. I don't know why you put up with me. I don't think I can do it.
Moreover, Bush's policies, undermining FEMA, invading Afghanistan and Iraq, inarguably resulted in the death and displacement of far more people than Trump's. Some might say that the actions taken by Republicans in the years since 2016 are more dangerous than those they took in the 2000s.
And Elliot confesses that his love map takes him to Wakanda. So later in the movie, Jonathan becomes quite dissolute, and he says, look, Sandy, this is just between the two of us. For the last year or so, I've been having trouble. I'm having a little trouble, getting hard. It took a long time. You know how girls are today. They judge you. They judge you very quickly. So I remember I had that problem. Probably the most beautiful woman I ever dated the first time we did it, I couldn't maintain. And she told me later, that's never happened to me before. So Jonathan Degenerate says, I had a real rough time a couple of times, some very nasty innuendos. I wasn't too worried, but I won't lie to you. I was a little worried. Then along comes this Bobby. I get one look at the size of the pear on her. I never had a doubt that I'd ever be anything but okay again. And I was.
That the Trump GOP's claims of voter fraud and its attempts to limit voter participation threaten democracy in a way Bush's GOP never did. I find this hard to credit, given that Bush's many accomplishments, stealing an election, starting pointless wars, violating sundry civil liberties, are objectively more damaging and more Nazi-like than anything that Trump and his GOP tried to implement. Others might argue that the rise of far-right groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, and especially their participation in the insurrection of January 6, 2021, suggest that there's an unprecedented threat to U.S. democracy that only the word fascism can describe. But organizations like these have existed for decades and undertaken numerous spectacular acts. The Oklahoma City bombing of 1995 comes immediately to mind, as do the murders of doctors providing abortions, and the term fascist was not usually applied to them. A similar argument is sometimes made about the rise of far-right governments around the world in places like Hungary, Poland, Russia, and Turkey. But again, these types of autocratic governments have long been a feature of international politics and were not generally identified as fascist. It therefore seems that one must look elsewhere to explain the explosion of fascism talk since 2016. To my mind, the major reason fascism talk has lately reached a crescendo is that, for the first time in almost a century, liberalism finds itself in crisis. The utopian promises made in the 1990s and 2000s, when liberals averred that we were at the end of history, have not come true. The economy has collapsed multiple times. Inequality has increased. U.S. attempts to promote democracy abroad have failed as Eastern Europe, once the site of liberalism's greatest triumph, has lurched to the right. Bernie Sanders has reinvigorated Americans' interest in social democracy, and the loutish Trump's victory indicated that many Americans are tired of adhering to liberal norms of engagement and exchange. Liberalism is weaker than it has been since the Great Depression. For most of the 20th century's second half, liberalism was kept vigorous and popular because it was able to define itself against a communist enemy, which, liberals affirmed, was the primary obstacle standing in the way of a better world. But communism has been defeated, and 30 years later, everything looks and feels pretty much the same, only worse. Liberals therefore need a credible enemy whose viciousness might attract Americans to the centrist cause and, in the process, help them overlook liberals' manifold and manifest failures. Simply put, fighting fascism provides liberals with an opportunity to reinvigorate their project in a moment of crisis. This is why fascism talk exploded under Trump and not under Bush. Under the latter, liberal dreams had not yet curdled. But this still doesn't answer the normative question: should we on the left use the term fascism? To many, it might not matter that fascism has no coherent analytical meaning. What matters is that it's a politically useful way, first, to...
Look, if you want to be respectable, if you want to speak the truth, if you want to live in truth, then you can't discuss American politics as fascist. So some people have no problems being people of the lie, right? A lot of people have no problem lying, and so they throw around the term fascist. But if you have any self-respect, you can't use fascist for American political developments, right? Pretty simple.
Force people to appreciate that U.S.-style liberal democratic capitalism doesn't prevent oppression of the kind that occurred in Nazi Germany, and second, to mobilize people against right-wing extremism. I'm not persuaded by the first argument. I have yet to see compelling evidence that indicates invoking fascism leads Americans to confront racialized state violence. Leftists have been using fascism as a term of abuse for decades, and it doesn't appear to have had much effect on how the population understands society. I am also skeptical of the claim that using the term fascism is an important means to mobilize people against the far right. It seems to me that there are likely more meaningful ways to rally one's side against reaction that are centered less on abstract concepts and more on promising and giving people money and benefits, as the recent success of John Fetterman's populist campaign suggests.
Okay, let's have a look at the chat. 40, would you grow your beard back for more money? Yes, I would, but I'm concerned, does this make me a whore? I remember I was at CVSY Synagogue, used to go there regularly on Friday nights, and some friends of mine there told me, you're getting a very bad reputation, young man. I said, a very bad reputation for what? And she says, people are calling you a male whore. Man, just a gigolo everywhere I go. Life goes on without me. No, bro, you just like to grab life by the tail. How much money would I need to grow my beard back? I don't know exactly, but I tell you what, I'll know it when I see it, right? When I see a certain amount of money to grow my beard back, I will know it when I see it, and I'll do it. All right, let's get emotionally mature.
When you're experiencing distress, you also don't want to sit there in agony. So what can you do to manage your emotions? Just like when you break your arm or something else and you've got physical pain, you don't want to sit there in complete agony until your arm heals. You want to make the pain tolerable. You may recognize that there's nothing you can do to make that pain completely go away, but what can you do to make it tolerable? So once you start becoming more aware of your emotions, you're also going to start becoming more aware of emotions in others. When you know that this is what happiness looks like in you, when you see it in other people, you're going to recognize it more. The next activity is mindfulness, being mindful of your feelings. It's great to have an emotional vocabulary, but if you are on autopilot all the time and you don't notice when you're feeling a certain way, then it doesn't do any good. You can't respond to something that you don't recognize. You can't respond to something that you don't notice. So be mindful of your feelings. Be mindful of your vulnerabilities for distress. And that is one of the ways that you respond to distressful emotions, is to recognize, I'm sick, I'm in pain, I'm tired, whatever your vulnerabilities are. This is going on with me today, so I am more likely to respond in an unpleasant way. I'm more likely to get angry. I'm more likely to get frustrated today. Okay, so you're recognizing that, and then you can respond to it. You can manage your actions, and you can manage, to a certain extent, the day in order to try to prevent distress. So emotional intelligence says, I know that when I'm overtired, I tend to be cranky. Therefore, since I'm tired, I'm going to take proactive steps so I don't experience more distress than is necessary. Be mindful of other people's feelings. And I mentioned earlier, once you start recognizing feelings in yourself, you're going to start recognizing it in others. Once you start recognizing how to respond to feelings in yourself.
So seriously, you'll discern reality much more clearly if you have more emotional maturity and more emotional sophistication. And so you won't have to hate watch the news, right? You'll be able to recognize when your emotions are taking over and clouding your perception of what's going on around you. So that little digression seemed like, oh, that's got absolutely nothing to do with current events, 40. That has nothing to do with politics. This is a channel that's largely about politics. Why the hell are you playing this irrelevant material? Well, the more emotionally mature you are, the more emotionally sophisticated you are, the more emotionally literate you are, right? The more clarity you will have about yourself and the world around you, all right? Because we don't tend to see the world as it is. We tend to see the world as we are, right? When we can start getting out of our own way, recognizing what's clouding our own vision, right? We're going to be able to discern the news much more clearly.
You're going to have an inkling about how others might want you to respond to them. Now, just because when you get upset, you want to hug, doesn't mean other people will. So you don't want to assume too much. But you're well on the way to responding appropriately. You're not going to be dismissive of them when they're feeling depressed or anxious or angry about something. So be mindful of other people's feelings. Start out easy. Start out by watching television and just trying to identify how you think a particular character in a television show feels. And this is a great activity to do as a family, to do with children. And you can.
So the autistic tend to be really bad at recognizing other people's motivations, while the schizophrenic tend to be really bad at an exaggerated belief in what's going on with other people. So the autist discerns too little about what's motivating other people, and the schizo, he imagines and imputes all sorts of things that are going on with other people that are not really there.
You can talk about, well, why do you think that person was feeling that way? And you can also practice using your graded words. Instead of saying that person looks happy, you can say that person looks ecstatic or that person looks content. You can also look on the playground or at work or in the shopping center when you're out just people watching. Be mindful of their feelings. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going.
So you'll get along a lot better if you recognize what's going on with people. All right, if someone's down, you should take that into account. You could say a complete stranger in the elevator, right? You're riding an elevator and they look depressed and suicidal. You can say, looks like you're having a tough day. And people appreciate that little bit of empathy. On the other hand, if someone's happy at work, it's like, oh, sounds like you're having a great day. Right? You should take people's emotional state into account when you're interacting with them. You should speak to them differently. You should be reading signals. 40, if you're suddenly in your 20s again, what would you do with your life? I would, if I knew then what I know now, I would jump into 12-step programs, particularly programs like Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, Adult Children of Alcoholics, Al-Anon, Under Owners Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous, Love Addicts Anonymous, programs like that. So I would try to get emotionally sober. So I think that would be, if I couldn't eat meat, I'd find a way to ingest meat because I am so weak without meat. So if I can't swallow, beef organ capsules, I'd have to find some way of, at least swallowing some meat if I can't learn to eat it. So those are the two things that I know now that I wish I would have been able to do in my 20s. Also, love was so special and precious then. I remember there was this one, very sweet woman that I knew at Sierra Community College. We had a couple of classes together, and it was before class, and she was just kind of zoning out, sitting at her desk, and I went down and surprised her, and she started crying. I surprised her that she started crying. She wasn't bawling; she was just crying. And then she reached for me, like in her vulnerability and in her pain and confusion, she reached for me, and she said, "Hey, we should go to UC Davis together." This is a very sweet, lovely, beautiful, intelligent, moral woman. I shouldn't have been, screwing around. I should have settled down with someone like her instead of spending my 20s banging.
Going to intervene because, they may be strangers. But if you start becoming more mindful of the people around you, then when you are in a situation where you're surrounded by people that you care about, you're going to have practiced feeling identification. It's going to be more automatic. You also might start picking up on what I call energies in the environment. If you're in a situation, if you're in a restaurant or an organization, you're in a business, and you start feeling anxious for some reason, if you have good emotional intelligence, you may look around and notice that everybody looks miserable. And so you can start becoming aware of where your feeling is coming from because you're sensing their feelings. You want to be mindful of your impact on other people's feelings. How does your presence impact somebody else? If they're having the worst day of their life and you come in and you're all Susie Sunshine and bubbles and rainbows, that is not acknowledging them. That's dismissing their feelings. Yes, you have a right to feel happy, but it's also important to recognize that if you come in and you start, just kind of dumping all that on them, they may not be able to process it. They may feel ignored, neglected, rejected. So you want to recognize your impact on people. Likewise, if you're in an awful mood, noticing how that impacts the people around.
So I'm usually in a good mood 95% of the time. And so it kind of takes me aback when I encounter people who just try to absolutely minimize all contact with me. And so my younger self would have been much more perturbed and would have tried 101 ways to break them down. But now when I encounter people who just want nothing to do with me, if they're forced to interact with me, they keep it, they gray rock me, right? They just put the very least energy possible into their interactions with me. I'd like to think that now that I'm older and wiser, I don't try to force the issue. I just give people their space. And I detect, I'd like to think that I'm better at reading people's cues. So women in particular were very confusing, right? Sometimes they'd be just like very friendly and outgoing, and then suddenly they just change like that. And I would, I'd keep behaving as though, I was still in the thrall of when they were happy and friendly to me, but they really wanted absolutely nothing to do with me. And so I'd make a fool of myself. Is my P.O. box still open? Yes, it is. So what the heck? Yeah. My P.O. box is still open. I like these videos by Doc Snipes. So Dr. Dawn Elise Snipes.
Around you, do they start walking on eggshells? Do they get cranky themselves so you're both being irritable to each other? How does that impact you? And what could you do differently? If you don't want that to happen, emotional intelligence says, okay, I'm going to be smart about how I respond when I'm feeling this way. And being mindful of others' vulnerabilities for distress, kind of in general. And again, you don't want to get too far into mind reading. But if for example, we've talked in other videos about how my daughter's an introvert. And I am aware that one of her vulnerabilities for distress is being out in a really busy place. It's just overwhelming to her. She's highly sensitive. It's overwhelming to be in a really crowded, busy, hustly, bustly environment like an airport or the mall on Saturday or something. So I am aware of her vulnerabilities for distress in general. And I try to be sensitive to that, recognizing that if she starts acting overwhelmed or exhausted or anxious, and we happen to be in one of those places, I might say, hey, it seems like you're getting overwhelmed. Would you like to go? Generally, adults, hopefully, are going to identify when they start feeling overwhelmed and be more assertive and say, hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Can we?
Okay, you're probably wondering, 40, what's going on with the Australian Army? Here's a recruitment video from Down Under. Boy, it really makes you want to join up, doesn't it? So the commentary here, Australian recruitment ad for the Australian Army. The focus has shifted from protecting citizens from foreign enemies to protecting authorities from its own unarmed protesting citizens. The people have become the enemy. Yeah, boy, that's really appealing. That'll really pack them in. So Richard Ananya notes the Wall Street Journal very unhappy with Ron DeSantis on Ukraine. So if Ron DeSantis is going to win the Republican nomination, he's going to have to win Republicans that read the Wall Street Journal and make sure that they don't vote for Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, etc. This is an important issue for them. Not an important issue for the overwhelming majority of Americans, but a very important issue for the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal. All right, I got to loosen up, get limber, get ready for the UCLA game starting in 20 minutes. So take care. Bye-bye. Chat says, Aussie's getting ready to deal with the real domestic threat. The Chi-Coms are just the excuse. Sloppy seconds Ron needs to lift his political skirt for the donors. Bye-bye.